And fire. What, 40 years later nearly? Wow. Holographic. Oh dear. Oh no. Oh no, what have I done? Decks flying everywhere. What an absolute nightmare. I'm worried for this Mercury retrograde. Hello everybody, it's Sylvie. Welcome or welcome back to Tarot Magpie. I hope you are doing all kinds of good, and I hope you are enjoying Aries season, which, as I film this and as it goes live, you know, disaster pending. I shouldn't joke about that, you know, because we're in the Mercury retrograde pre-shadow, and I have been having technological difficulties aplenty already. So really, I should not be tempting astrological fate with that one. So we are in Aries season, and today I am bringing you a handful of decks that I associate with the fire element and with Aries, the zodiac sign, as well as the other fire signs. This is a part one to a series of elemental tarot decks, or tarot decks for each of the elements, I guess. I know plenty of people do these videos for each like zodiac sign as we move through them, which I think is really cool. I don't know if I have the astrological knowledge or variety of decks to do that justice. I feel like it would end up getting a little bit repetitive. And also I am just really into the elements at the moment. A lot of what I've been reading and thinking about and taking notes on in the tarot and the way I've been looking at it has been very elemental. So I just liked the idea of doing this as an element and incorporating all of the zodiac signs into that, as well as just whatever else I feel is fiery. So fire decks today. I've got, I think, 10 here. Some of them make sense and are a bit obvious, some of them less so. And I will get straight into it. Okay, we're going to start with the obvious ones. And this is the deck that features on my channel all the time. Any guesses? Tarot of Fuego. This is a very cute little deck from Fournier, who I, you know, bang on about all the time. Gorgeous cardstock, gorgeous little size. And I think you can tell from the name of this deck, as well as all of the imagery, why this is a no-brainer kind of fiery deck for me. Because every card has fire on it, I think. Does every single card have this fire on it? And, you know, it's really bright, it's really punchy, it's got really bold colours. It's not a quiet deck, it's not a subtle deck. And in reading, it is also not really a subtle deck. Like, you can see we've got the fire, we've got the lightning, we've got the skulls. Like, it's not soft and fuzzy. It's not particularly brutal. Like, it's not a particularly harsh reader in its messaging. On first impressions, it's very intense. And that feels very fiery. It especially feels very like Aries, that like strong initiation energy of like, let's go. But in its messaging is not necessarily as intense as you'd expect. Like, it's not a harsh deck. It's just loud. Like, it's that person who is like yelling, but they're not actually yelling. They're just being really, really loud about it, if that makes sense. I'm thinking of someone very specific who is just extremely loud. Tarot del Fuego. It's an obvious fiery deck, and it's one that I just generally love. Fiery visually and kind of, yeah, that like strong initiation kind of energy, and I love this Temperance. Temperance is Sagittarius, right? So Temperance is a fire sign, not the one we're currently in, obviously. It is a fire sign, so it feels very fitting to end on that one. Okay, another obvious one, the Bonefire Tarot. Once again, fire literally in the title, fire in the imagery. I've got to gush over this gorgeous red edging. I did a walkthrough first impressions playing with pairs when I first got this, and I don't know the amount of times I like cooed over the gorgeous red edging, but it was a lot. So this is the second edition that came out last year, and there's a lot of fire in the imagery. It's very simple heavy in the imagery. Like, there's a lot of, obviously it's very simple heavy. Tarot decks do tend to be, but I mean there's a lot of specific repeating symbols. So like, we've got, I think the bones is one. Like, do you see, like, again, this like crossbones? And I know there's things like dice that crop up again, like here again. It's very simple heavy, and that feels quite fiery. Couldn't tell you why, that's just a vibe. It's also very punchy It's not a similar reader to the Tarot del Fuego. I feel they give different energies. I feel that this feels like it can go a lot deeper, or you can do more with it. Whereas I would go to the Tarot del Fuego if I wanted, you know, quick, to the point answers. Oh, you can see here what my main issue with this deck is that it's just a little bit overwhelming when you like put them next to each other because there's no borders. And maybe that's also pretty fiery, you know, like fire spreads if you don't contain it. And this is not a very contained deck visually. So in that sense, I think it also fits. But once again, this was just a pretty obvious, didn't have to think too hard about this pick. So that is the Bonefire Tarot, and then we've got our 10 of Wands there, our fiery pine cones. This is also my Aries season daily draw. I have a daily tarot practice that includes choosing a deck for each zodiac season, and then I pull a card, and it's like a mini study practice. I pull a card a day, I have a look at the guidebook. I chose this one because it's got such a good informative guidebook that really goes into all the symbols, and I'm really enjoying working with it and pulling a card every day and just kind of getting to know it. This isn't a divinatory practice so much as a study practice, but it's definitely very Aries season appropriate in my mind. Okay, my final obvious no-brainer choice is the Mars Power Tarot, because of course Mars is the ruling planet of Aries. It's fiery, it's red, it's got the colours going on. This edition that I have is holographic. It looks absolutely intense under the lights. Again, it's a lot. It's a lot. This feels very Leo. The shininess of this feels very Leo. It's the centre of attention. It's the star, you know, like the sun is the star. The sun is the centre of our galaxy. And Leo is the sun. Leo wants to be the star and the center of attention. And this deck really does that. The colors, again, you know, red, lots of these warm, fiery colors. I also do think the slightly chaotic energy of all three decks that I've shown so far, actually. The slightly chaotic energy also feels quite fiery to me. Yeah, like I say, no brainer. The Mars deck had to be in the fire selection. I know also a couple of people I've seen on YouTube, I know that Marlena is one, have referred to this as a rage deck, which I think is a perfect use for this deck. And I totally get that. And I think that's a very cool way to use it. Mars Power Tarot. I also adore these card backs. I just think they're so cool. Right, that is all our really obvious choices out of the way. And so now I have some slightly less no-brainer kind of picks. This is the Morgan Greer, and this feels like a fire deck to me. It's bold, bright colors. It's got these gorgeous blue skies. Like, it feels very hot and summery. So, you know, that fits. But it's the way it's like zoomed in, like quite close up portraits of people, like, as opposed to, although this is a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, I would call it, we're much more zoomed in. It's this kind of head and shoulders, we're in their faces, and I feel like it makes it feel a little bit more action oriented. It's like, okay, here's what you do, follow my lead. Again, quite Leo, quite Aries especially. It's a very action oriented deck. So that is the Morgan Greer. This also, again, very punchy when I do a reading with it. It's like, oh, okay, yep, that's what we're doing. Got it, understood. Loud and clear, loud and clear. This is not a very subtle deck. And I don't want to say that fire signs can't be subtle, but if there's an element that is less attuned to subtlety, I would say it's fire. That is our Morgan Greer. Right, this one, I swear I didn't just pick it because it's in a red scarf, although it caught my eye. This is the Mariel Tarot. Somewhere in here is the Mariel Tarot. There we go. And like, come on, right on top with the flaming 9 of Wands. So again, the colour palette had a lot to do with it. I'm interested to see, doing the rest of the elements, if the colour palette is going to be as strong of a deciding factor for the other elements, but it really had a lot of say for a lot of these fire decks. It's bold, it's bright, it's in your face, it's not shy. The reason I chose the Mariel as a fire deck specifically is because it is just so much its own thing, and I think there's a sense of like confidence in that, in it very much doing its own thing and being very intensely its own thing. I know it follows a lot of different systems. It's not, you know, entirely created out of nothing. It doesn't feel like it's trying to make life easy. Well, it does not make life easy if you're a Rider-Waite-Smith reader. And it is kind of, you've just got to let it be in charge and follow where it takes you, is what I find when I'm reading with this. It's not exactly combative, but I think that's possibly because I do just go where it takes me and do as I'm, you know, follow where this deck leads me. Not necessarily do as I'm told. I'm not going to argue with the direction this deck is going in a reading. I think with some decks and in some readings, you can kind of do that thing of every card has so many meanings that you can create whatever response you want out of any card. And I don't think that's strictly true, and that's not how I read, but there are some readings and some questions where you can do that a little bit more than others. This is not one of those decks you can do that with. You cannot mold this deck into the answer that you want out of it. It does its own thing, and it does it beautifully and confidently. So that is the Mariel. And come on, I have phoenixes on this scarf as well. It's so a fire deck. I didn't do this on purpose. I matched this color on purpose because this like hot vermilion kind of color is one I do really associate with this deck. But I didn't choose the phoenix on purpose. But like it's a fire deck. It didn't even have to tell me that it's a fire deck. It's just so obviously a fire deck. The Enchanted Voyager Tarot. I will be honest with you, this is largely based on vibes, but I can't deny it. This is a fire deck to me. I also have a walkthrough, first impressions, etc. of this one up on the channel. This is the mass market version that came out last year, and this is a fae deck. But it is certainly not the soft and gentle kind of fairy deck. There is an intensity to it that I think works well with the fire element. The imagery also there with the tower is a little bit bolder, maybe harsher perhaps in some of the cards than a lot of other fae or fairy decks would be. And there's like a wildness to it, which makes me think fire. Like I say, this one is mostly based on vibes. I do love that these suits have been renamed to the elements, like that fits nicely with this whole elemental theme. But yeah, like I say, this one is mostly based on vibes, so I'm not going to say much more about it because I don't have too much to say. But of all the fae decks out there, this feels fiery. Okay, I've just realised I have another Fairy Tarot in this stack. I wouldn't have thought that going in, that I would have two fairy decks for the fire suit. I did these fun rainbow edges myself to match the different coloured fronts. Okay, so this one I feel like is a fire deck because it is chatty. It's chatty, it's expressive, it's entertaining. Again, it's a bit of that like Leo energy in there. It's not a very sensitive deck, if that makes sense. That's not its priority. Also, it kind of feels like, and I don't know, maybe this is just me, kind of feels like it's ready to fight a little bit. If that makes any sense. Like, I've not had, this is mostly, you know, it's fun, it's chatty. It's not too worried about being sensitive. It's not too concerned with potentially hurting my feelings. Or not hurting my feelings, because I don't think it ever has really hurt my feelings. It's like, I'm kind of, you know, when you meet some people and they're not being rude and you can tell they're not intending to be harsh or rude, but you just get like a sense that they're not too worried about not being rude, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like it's kind of, it's ready to fight as and when that is needed. It's a little bit brutally honest. So that is the Fairy Tarot. This is by Natalie Hertz. As you can probably tell, I don't really gravitate towards the like soft and fluffy airy fairy fairies. It's not my vibe. Okay, this is the Crow's Magic Tarot, and the copy that I have is not the actual deck. This is a reproduction that I got through Mick Playing Cards last year. it was taken down, it was only up for a short time, and I'm not sure if it's been up since or if it's going to be up again. Do you know what I will say? I don't love the Make Playing Cards cardstock, or at least this standard smooth, because it warps like crazy. But why do I think this is a fire deck? Again, it's the imagery, like, come on. But it just feels particularly Sagittarian. This and the next one I'm going to talk about feel particularly Sagittarian. And I'm not quite sure why, but they're a little bit spiritual in a way that is kind of expansive, which feels very Sagittarian. Or not spiritual per se, but they feel like they could be, or that they're just doing that exploring from a place that is spiritual rather than a push for, you know, fame or power. I hope that makes sense, but that's the kind of feeling I get from this deck. Like, it's a little bit weird, it's a little bit doing its own thing, it's having an explore and an adventure, but it's more of a kind of soul-based exploration, or that's where it's coming from. This is a particularly Sagittarian deck in my opinion, but it's definitely a fiery deck. So that is the Crow's Magic Tarot. Oh, I haven't even mentioned the keywords, but there's a feeling from the keywords, or a like overall the kind of tone of the keywords also feels like it's very fiery, and I'm afraid that I cannot be more articulate than that. This is not a deck that I know super well, so that's probably part of it. Like, Two of Coins, cryptic and mysterious. That is not a traditional Two of Coins pair of keywords, in my opinion. It's definitely trying to be a bit more of that expansive and kind of maybe pushing some boundaries and maybe going on a bit of an adventure. Okay, the penultimate deck, as promised, also feels Sagittarian to me, and that is the Voyager Tarot. Come on, this did feel a little bit obvious actually to me, because Sagittarians being like adventurers, explorers, this is the Voyager Tarot. The whole philosophy behind this deck was a kind of updated tarot for the world that existed in the, when was the deck made? The 80s, I think? 1986 was the first edition. I think in, I've seen like an interview with James Wanless, and I've read the little guidebook and the Voyager big guidebook in part, not necessarily cover to cover, but anyhow, it was kind of, this deck was created to reflect the world that existed in the 80s as opposed to the Rider-Waite-Smith, and also I think was responding to the way that public consciousness had changed around tarot and oracle, which feels quite Sagittarian to me, particularly with the Voyager heading. Like, it's going on an adventure, it's doing an exploration. I suppose it could also be maybe quite Aquarian would also feel right, but this feels fiery to me, because also it was the, I don't know factually speaking if it was the first collage tarot deck, but it's definitely the earliest, most well-known one that I'm aware of. So it also feels like it's doing that Aries thing of like kickstarting something and being a bit of a trailblazer. And it's been so popular for so long, like it's still in print. 40 years later nearly? Wow, it's still in print. It's kind of the star in a way, kind of the star of the collage world. So that is the Voyager Tarot. The final deck that I have here definitely is going to require a little bit of explaining. I don't think everybody would necessarily see the Tarot of Vampyres by Ian Daniels as a fire element kind of a deck, because you see vampires, you think Scorpio, right? But there is something about this deck. I think it's in the strength of the vision that went behind this, and or what I assume to be passion that went into that vision behind this, as well as the passion that some people have about this deck and how strongly they feel about it. That feels pretty fiery to me. And I think it is mostly that, it's that like strength of vision and execution of that strength of vision. And then the other thing about this is the guidebook is so packed with information and explaining the vision behind this and bringing in like Thothi influences, and I think there's some Kabbalah in there as well. Like it's doing its own thing, kind of similar to the way I feel about the Mariel Tarot. Like it's doing its own thing, it's kind of forging its own path, it's kind of blazing its own trail. Like that feels very fire energy. Like the aesthetic, like I say, you see vampires, you think Scorpio. I feel like this is more of a fiery deck. There's also an intensity to like all the figures. And again, not to say that fire signs are the only ones that can be intense. There's particularly a like passion to it that feels fiery to me. I'm at this point just flipping through because it's beautiful. Okay, so that is the final deck in this little collection. This is the Tarot of Vampyres. This was my fire element associated decks. That is 10 decks that I personally associate with the fire element of things. Some of those were really obvious. Some of those maybe only made sense to me, but I would be interested to see what you think. Let me know if you would agree with me, would disagree with me. Do you use decks for like particular zodiac seasons or like elementally? Let me know. I'd be interested. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed. Thank you for spending some time with me. Give me a like if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.